Hello and welcome back to Russ's Movie Corner. My name is Russ, and as you can see, I am sitting in front of my movie corner. I have a Star Wars t-shirt on because I do not have anything James Bond related, and I have my Octopussy movie right next to me, which means we are back doing the James Bond retrospective. This is part 4. We're just over halfway through the Bond series. Okay, after we get done today, then we'll get into the Brosnans and then the Daniel Craigs. And then I'll kind of, at the end of the Daniel Craigs, I'll kind of talk about the future of the Bond series, where it's heading, what's going on, all of that good stuff. Um, and we'll have some other things to kind of talk about with that. So, without any further ado, let's jump into the retrospective again. Oh boy, we're getting into the kind of the worst part, in my opinion, of the Bond series. Now, I'm not saying that the entire series is flawless, okay? There are some movies that I think are kind of on the weaker side. And I would put them down in the very, very bottom of the series itself. These next two films that we're going to be discussing, Octopussy and A View to a Kill, are definitely bottom tier James Bond films. Now, that doesn't stop people from liking them, and they're welcome to like them if they want. But this is where the camp factor went right through the roof, okay? There was nothing, nothing that. There was no reason for this movie to have this much camp in it. I remember I was watching this movie again. I hadn't seen it in forever, so I started watching through it. And so, what precipitated this is I love the Daniel Craigs, okay? And they're right over here, okay? Starting with Casino Royale and going all the way to No Time to Die. I love them. They're wonderful, wonderful films. But my problem is that, well, so what precipitated this is that I'm sorry. There's no problem with them. There's one that's kind of on the weaker side, but basically, I really enjoyed the Daniel Craig films. So then I went back and I watched through the Brosnan films just to kind of do a little comparison. Um, because I had kind of like started watching through the Brosnan films, and I really liked the Brosnan films. And then I got to Daniel Craig, and I liked Daniel Craig's portrayal a little better than Brosnan's. Now, don't get me wrong, Brosnan was an excellent Bond. Daniel Craig, I think, was a little bit closer to the character of Sean Connery, whereas Brosnan was a mix of like Roger Moore and Sean Connery. He had some of the physicality of the Sean Connery with a lot more of Moore's humor and a little bit of that camp kind of mixed in. Okay. Whereas I thought Craig was a lot closer to the actual Sean Connery, which made him a little bit closer to the actual book version of James Bond. Um, so then after I got done with that, I thought, well, I might as well go ahead and sit back down and watch through the whole entire series. So I went back and I started with From Russia with Love, like I said in my introduction, and I watched all the way through, dreading when I got to this one because I know how bad it is. And I know that I normally don't like to be extremely negative on this channel. When I talk about movies, when I talk about things, I've only done that with a couple of movies. And one of the movies that I've done that with was this one, Dragonlance, Dragons of Autumn Twilight. This animated film was a piece of absolute crap. Okay? Compared to something like this, okay, which is an animated masterpiece, even though there's live action in it. Compared to this is a masterpiece. I would watch this 500 times before I watch this one again. Now, funnily enough, I'm actually reading through with my girlfriend. We're actually reading through the Dragonlance Chronicles, so I'm probably going to watch it again just to remind myself just how bad the movie really is. The other one I devoted an entire movie to. Okay, I literally, or a video to. I literally went through this piece by piece and kind of picked this movie apart. Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. And the only reason I did that was because I'm a huge Final Fantasy fan. I love Final Fantasy. And when I saw this film, I had high hopes. I think with a lot of people, I had really high hopes about this film. And I really wanted this film to be good. Because if this film was good, there was a chance that they were going to actually take some of the games and try to make them as movies, right? Like you'd want. But that's not what we got. Okay, we got a retread Final Fantasy VII plot set in the real world with everybody being Aeris. And just being permadeath for no reason other than this is Final Reality, The Spirits Within, not Final Fantasy, The Spirits Within. I keep asking people, where's the fantasy? Like, we can't bring people back to life? We can't have people come back to life? We have to kill every single one of our main leads off? With the exception of 2 characters? I mean, come on, guys. What the hell? What is this? And so, when I tell you that I'm going to be a little negative, okay, about this film, okay, I want you to understand the context of why I'm being negative and why I'm being harsh on it. Okay? Because I'm a huge Bond fan. And I love Roger Moore. Okay? My, like, second favorite personal Bond film of all time, okay, is Moonraker. It's a Roger Moore film. I love Roger Moore. He's a great James Bond. But he was getting too old, number one, okay, when he got to Octopussy. Now, in this one, I think they went back to the Goldfinger standard of I think this is the only other Bond film where the opening has no bearing on the actual story at hand. Okay? You have this guy, you have Bond impersonating this general named General Toro, I think. And he goes in and he plants a bomb on like a radar guidance on this plane, okay? Then Bond gets off on this Acrostar jet, which is a one-person jet, and he takes off and he flies around, and the upshot of it is that they find the bomb. Bond ends up like getting chased by a heat-seeking missile, and he flies through the hangar, and then they blow up. He blows up the hangar using the heat-seeking missile. Then comes probably, in terms of what I would call the weakest of all of the James Bond themes thus far, is All Time High by Rita Coolidge. Because here again, how do you make a song out of the title? Title's literally Octopussy. Then Bond learns that there's these Fabergé eggs, okay? the MacGuffin of the story is that there's these fake Fabergé eggs being dumped onto the market. So Carl Fabergé made a whole bunch of like eggs that opened up and had like royal coaches and had like all these different like intricately carved and designed things inside for the Russian royal family that were pretty much kind of acquired by the Communist Party when they took over in the Soviet Union. I think it was 1913 when that revolution happened. Or 1914, whenever the revolution was for them. Was it 1916? I can't remember the date with that. It's been so long since I've learned about it. But anyway, and so they are trying to flood the market with these fakes so that the people can see the differences in, or people will buy, thus infusing cash. And basically there's this circus owner, okay, by the name of Octopussy, played by Maud Adams, okay, one of the only times that a previous Bond actor comes back to play a different character, okay, one of the few times that a previous Bond girl, especially, comes back to play a completely different character. Because she was in Man with the Golden Gun, she played Miss Anders, and she was killed off by the titular Man with the Golden Gun because she was his lover, and so and I think the producers liked her enough that they wanted to bring her back and give her a better role, give her a stronger female character. And so Bond goes in, finds all of these different things, okay, and I guess one of the double O's is trying to escape and gets knifed in the back, and he's holding a fake Fabergé egg, okay, and basically, Bond goes to a auction, and he takes the fake egg and he replaces it, or he basically replaces the fake with the real, okay, and then takes that and kind of bribes a guy named Kamal Khan, who is a business associate of Octopussy, kind of the main villain. And then there's a Russian general named General Orlov, who is played by none other than Steven Berkoff, who played in such movies as... Do I have it right quick? Don't see it right offhand, and I'm not going to go for it. But basically, he was in the original Beverly Hills Cop movie with Eddie Murphy, and I'm just seeing if I can find it. He had played in a bunch of other movies in the 80s and 90s. And so he was in this film right around the time that he did the role in, because I think this one was 1983. And so I believe the original Beverly Hills Cop was in 1985 or 86. Maybe 84. But it would have been right around the time that he did this film. So that's probably the reason why he was cast in Beverly Hills Cop, was because of his role in this film, where he played an excellent villain. Okay. Louis Jourdan plays Kamal Khan. And so some misadventures ensue, and basically what you end up finding out is that they've been using not only this stuff to do things. What the end result is that this General Orlov character, played by Steven Berkoff, wants to detonate a nuclear bomb on an American airbase. Okay? And when he does, when it goes off, they will insist on nuclear disarmament, thereby allowing the Russians to be able to sweep across Europe with no fear of reprisal, because nobody is going to be looking to antagonize them because they have the nukes, nobody else does. Okay? So Bond ends up stopping the nuke, and with Octopussy's help, and then they end up going and assaulting Kamal Khan's palace to try to stop everything. Orlov is trying to get on the train, and he ends up getting gunned down by some Soviet troops, and because the Russians didn't want to be seen entering into Western Europe. Okay, because at this time the Iron Curtain is still up, everything's still kind of moving forward from that, and so we have a different sort of thing where we don't have the détente, but we do have General Gogol, played by Walter Kottel. He is kind of a voice of reason because he's been working with people in the West through détente. He knows that the Western countries want to pursue more peace with the Soviet Union. And in a sense, you can almost see this as the sort of Star Trek VI of the franchise. And for those of you that don't know, because maybe you're not in the know, Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, I have it on Blu-ray here, was a starts out with an explosion, and a moon called Praxis, that we're not sure where Praxis is, but it explodes, and it takes out the it kind of cripples the Empire, and the Empire has to sue for peace to try to survive. Okay, and that peace lasts until Way of the Warrior, the season 4 opener for Deep Space Nine, where the Klingons start to become belligerent because they figure that too much peace has been there. And so you have, on one side, you have General Gogol, who is saying, we need to open up more relations, we need to expand our interests, we need to start allowing people to come and live here, we need to start allowing our people to go and live there. And General Orlov's like, no, we need to expand militarily. We need to show these people that the Soviet Union is still strong. And because this was a few years before the Chernobyl incident. Now, the Bond series never really acknowledged the Chernobyl incident happened from the standpoint of kind of the death of the Soviet Union. They actually don't really even talk much about it, even in the Pierce Brosnan era. It's almost like in the Bond universe that Chernobyl didn't happen, they just kind of whimpered out, which they would have eventually. So we'll get to that when we get to the Pierce Brosnan Bonds. But suffice it to say that the plot fails, and then Louis Jourdan kidnaps Maud Adams' character, and then you have Gobinder, who is this, like, again, unstoppable henchman, whom Bond has to fight on top of an airplane, where he takes, like, a little thing, and he whaps the guy in the face, and he falls off the plane, and he dies. And then Bond basically escapes with Octopussy, and so, like, and then at the very end, Bond is kind of recovering from his injuries, and he's got like a cast and a sling, and his foot's up, in a big foot cast, and and she's like, "Oh, if only you weren't in such a wretched condition." And then he just kind of like throws everything off and grabs her and starts kissing her. And then, of course, it's the "Oh, James" moment of the film. I think probably for me the biggest, campiest, cruddiest moment, I think, comes when, like, so Bond gets captured by Kamal Khan, okay? And Kamal Khan wants to interrogate him, do all this stuff. He escapes. He kind of learns about some of the plot. And then as he's running away from the guys, Kamal Khan's character, or Kamal Khan, tries to go after Bond. And so, like, Bond runs through a spider web that is like, has like 5 or 6 tarantulas on it, which again wouldn't happen, but he ends up kind of like smashing one off of his arm. He only has one on him the whole time. Which if he ran through a spider web with like 5 of them on, most of them would probably end up on him. You'd probably end up with 2 or 3, but he only ends up with 1 for some reason. Then there's another part where he's running through the brush and he kind of hides for a second, and then a wild tiger jumps in front of him, and he goes, "Sit!" like it's a dog, and the thing sits, and you're going, "No, wait, what? What did I just watch? Like, what is this?" Like, I mean, that's kind of the level of camp that we've gotten to. And it's kind of fostered the notion that nothing bad could ever happen to James Bond. Okay, even though he ends up in all these casts and all these different things, the notion that Bond couldn't be hurt or couldn't have anything happen to him is kind of evident in this film from just some of those type of things that happen. And like, if you've been keeping score, he started in his 50s and now he's hitting his 60s. Okay? And he's getting way too old for the role. So to me, it's just kind of one of those things where I wish that they would have done something a little bit different. Like, I wish that they'd gotten Timothy Dalton a little earlier, or if they'd gotten Pierce Brosnan a little bit earlier. It's kind of sad to me that they let Roger Moore go on this long. And I know they thought because he was a big box office draw that if they changed the character that most people wouldn't come and see him, but as we'll see, that's not what happened. Okay? A View to a Kill. This one actually has a tie-in, which we'll get to in a bit. But A View to a Kill. So this was Roger Moore's 7th and thankfully final film in the James Bond franchise. Bond, at this point, Bond has been through a lot. Let's put it that way. And this time he's up against Christopher Walken. And Christopher Walken, I gotta say, probably hands down one of the best Bond villains of all time. I may give this movie crap. Okay? I may think it's one of the weaker Bond films out there. But it's for a completely different reason than what you're thinking. Okay? Because the villain's pretty strong. He has kind of an unstoppable henchman in Mayday, Grace Jones. It was one of the reasons why shows like In Living Color could make fun of Grace Jones, was because of this, and a couple of other films that she did, where she almost developed a very Chuck Norris-esque relation, not relationship, but a very Chuck Norris-esque reputation before Chuck Norris was Chuck Norris. Okay, before people started looking at the Chuck Norris thing and going, "Oh my gosh, Chuck Norris could, roundhouse kick the sun and out, and outlast the sun in a staring contest and all those kind of jokes." A lot of that was being leveled at Grace Jones back in the day. Like, Grace Jones could do no wrong. Like, Grace Jones is this person who knew everything under the sun, and she could throw people around like a rag doll and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it was hilarious. And so if you ever watch In Living Color, the original In Living Color, I'll just show you In Living Color. Okay. There are amazing ones. But yeah, there's yeah, I'm trying to remember. Wow, that one actually aired on my birthday. Crazy. I don't have one on here, I don't think. But yeah, they did a couple of things with like, and it might be in here and I'm just not seeing it. But basically, this one kind of like had some of those Grace Jones-esque ones where it's like, yeah, Grace Jones was this like Amazon woman who could never be stopped kind of thing. And part of that came from this film, okay? And there was a couple of other films and TV shows that she had done where she was essentially unstoppable. And it's like she just went off and did all this crazy stuff. So, what are we talking about here? What is the MacGuffin of the story? Well, the MacGuffin of the story is a microchip, weirdly enough. And basically, this is when the Bond... Well, actually, I shouldn't say this is when. I should say... in The Spy Who Loved Me, the actual book, Bond was not even the main character. The main character was some woman who was on the run from a mob, and she took refuge in, unbeknownst to her, an MI6 safe house, and Bond comes in to stay at the safe house and finds this woman there, and they end up, like, fighting off the... they end up fighting off these thugs, and they spend a night together, and at the very end, when she learns who Bond is, and that he's a spy, she basically says, he was the spy who loved me. So, with The Spy Who Loved Me is when they started to get away, like way away from what the actual stories were. Same thing with Moonraker. Moonraker was not about shuttles, was not about space stations, was not about master races. It was about a guy who was seeking revenge because he was a Nazi who lost his memory and then ends up being a person who, kind of comes out and does this stuff. Then you had For Your Eyes Only, which was a short story, and the movie that it's based that took the title has nothing to do with that short story. Octopussy was actually two short stories, The Hildebrandt Rarity and Property of a Lady, kind of smushed together, jumbled around, and then stretched out into a two-hour movie that has little to nothing to do with those two stories. Okay? It kind of ties back to those stories because Octopussy... So there was a guy in one of the short stories who was known as Major Dexter Smythe. Okay, and apparently in the story he talks about to Bond that he had a daughter, and that's what they did. The character of Octopussy was this guy's daughter. I didn't mention that while we were talking about the film, but that was basically kind of how they kind of tied that back into the short stories. To kind of show people that, oh, those events actually happened, see, and we're acknowledging that those events actually happened, and Bond was the guy that hunted him down and killed him. Okay, and so we have, so for this film, A View to a Kill, that was taken from a short story called From a View to a Kill. Okay, and again, they just took the title. They took nothing from the short story. Everything that's in this is brand spanking new. Okay? And so again, the MacGuffin is microchip. So basically, 007 is on some slopes in Siberia, and he finds a microchip on one of the 00's bodies. I don't know how many 00's that is now that's been killed in the series. I haven't been keeping track, but basically Bond then gets chased by some soldiers, and he ends up like blowing up a thing, and then he ends up blowing up like a snow sled, and then the front skid of the snow sled lands near him, and so he starts snowboarding down the mountain, and to California Girls by the Beach Boys. And then he gets on a little sub that's disguised like an iceberg, and so they and that was kind of the whole pre-credit sequence. The title song is Duran Duran singing A View to a Kill. And to me, that is probably one of the definitive Bond. Now, I'm a child of the 80s, of course, but that is one of the definitive Bond title songs, is A View to a Kill by Duran Duran. It is rockin'. Love that theme song. In fact, when I would go to track meets or cross-country meets, I would make sure to, right before I got off the bus to get ready to go, I would listen to A View to a Kill, and then I would get off the bus and I would have that song playing in my head the whole time. So yeah, it's a rockin' theme song. Love it to death. It is one of my favorites. I'm not going to do a breakdown of every single song and which one is my favorite and which one isn't, blah, blah, blah. But this one is one of my favorite songs of all time, is View to a Kill. Love that theme song. They also use a lot of blacklight paint on the females' bodies, on like different like clothing, different things, to kind of give it this sort of like kind of like an 80s neon vibe. Okay, because this came out in 1985, and it's a decent film. I mean, it's for the title sequence, for all of that stuff, it's a fairly decent film. Again, like The Punisher, okay, up here, okay, like The Punisher, I don't mind The Punisher with Dolph Lundgren. It's not the Marvel character of The Punisher, but it's a good film. Okay? Same thing here. Not a decent Bond film, but a good film nonetheless. If you don't look at it as strictly a Bond film, it's a decent movie. Okay? So, looking at it in that respect, it's a good film. So, going on into it, you find out that these microchips were being manufactured by Zorin. Okay? And he was selling them all over the world because he's been copying different microcircuitry designs. And basically, Max Zorin is an ex-KGB agent. And General Gogol, of course, makes an appearance again, Walter Gotell, and tries to tell him, no one ever leaves the KGB. And so they end up. The plot of the basic gist of the plot is that he sinks a lake, and then he's going to blow up a key geological lock along the San Andreas Fault near San Francisco, which is going to flood Silicon Valley. Okay? Thereby sinking the entirety of the American microcircuitry market, microchip market. Okay? And thereby creating a way for Zorin to become exorbitantly wealthy because he'll be the only one that can provide microchips. Plus, he can also eavesdrop on every single microchip he sells. So, it's a win-win for him. He gets everything, and, the world gets nothing. Sounds like a plot to a Bond game. We'll get to that. So, essentially, Bond... Mayday gets betrayed by Zorin. Bond rescues Mayday. They end up going down and getting the bomb. And Bond pushes Mayday out with the bomb because she has to hold the handbrake down. And she could have jumped free, but she decides to sacrifice herself. Now, we're going to talk about Tanya Roberts. Okay, this blonde gal right here. Okay, let's talk about her character for a minute. She plays a character named Stacy Sutton. Not the strongest character in the Bond franchise. In fact, I think she's probably one of the weakest characters and weakest Bond girls in the entire character. She is a complete damsel in distress. She does not give a rip about anything. Okay? She just screams the whole entire time. She screams Bond's name. She screams just to scream. She's just a complete damsel in distress. It is pathetic. And I'm sorry to have to say it that way. I really am. I thought that coming off of The Spy Who Loved Me, Moonraker, For Your Eyes Only, even Octopussy, you had 4 or 5 very strong Bond women, even going back to The Man with the Golden Gun. You had like 5 extremely strong female Bond girls, okay, in the series up to this point. And they chose, instead of having a gal who could, be kicking butt and be doing things, and yeah, maybe she gets kidnapped at the very end, would have been something that happened. They went with the damsel in distress trope. Why? It just doesn't make any sense. Plus the fact that, at this point, I believe Roger Moore was like 67. And now he's in his 60s, I know that. And so it's like, and she's like in her 20s. And so you have a guy that could technically be her grandfather, okay? And it just doesn't look right from optics point of view, okay? It almost looks like, those old rich men with the trophy wives, right? Where you see the old guy who's in his 70s and 80s walking around with a supermodel on his arm that's 60 years his junior. And in this case, she's 40 years his junior. And you're like, what is going on here? Like, how is this James Bond? Like, how is this relevant? I mean, if they'd had Timothy Dalton, I wouldn't have given it a second thought, because Timothy Dalton would have been in his 30s and she would have been in her 20s, and so there wouldn't have been a big age gap, and he would have been like, it's fine. But I mean, even Pierce Brosnan, who was offered the role after this, okay, he would have made a much better choice. And I think if they'd have gotten to him at Octopussy, he probably would have played it all the way through The World Is Not Enough. But instead, we got this. Okay? And so anyway, it ends on the Golden Gate Bridge. Basically, Bond ties the airship of Zorin to the bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge, and then they have a fight on top of the bridge, and basically Bond, kind of kicks Zorin off, and Zorin kind of can't hold on, and he falls off, and he falls down into the bay and dies. And then one guy tries to grab like a stick of dynamite, and he's going to throw it at Bond, and Bond cuts the rope that's holding the thing, and so it releases the airship, and the guy goes flying backwards and hits the wall and loses control of the dynamite, and then they proceed to do the stupid villain thing of kicking it around until it blows up, and then the whole airship blows up and floats out into the bay. It ends with Q looking for Bond in Stacy's home with this little robot, and he ends up like zooming up, and Bond ends up like taking a towel and throws it over the head of the robot. So overall, not a great Bond film. It really isn't. It would have been better had Roger Moore retired after For Your Eyes Only. He was starting to get up there in For Your Eyes Only, but in both Octopussy and A View to a Kill, he is way too old. Going back and watching it today, I just start to see that he is just getting way too old to be playing the role. It was what happened to Sean Connery. You watch You Only Live Twice, and then you watch Diamonds Are Forever, and you can really see him age. And he was like, I'm getting too old to play the role. Okay? They didn't want to do anything with it. They were like, no, we want to keep it this way. And I mean, that was kind of stupid on their part, but, hey, it's, what they want to do. Producers are producers, and they want to be able to do their thing, and, blah, blah, blah. So, all right. The Living Daylights. The Living Daylights. So, let's talk a little bit about this. So, Roger Moore decided, after View to a Kill, and A View to a Kill didn't do that well at the box office. He decided, I'm gonna step back from the role now. I'm done. I'm getting up there. Fans spoke. I need to retire. So he retired from Bond. Didn't retire from acting. He actually went on to do a movie called The Quest in 1995 with Jean-Claude Van Damme, which I thought was actually a fairly good film. I know a lot of people hated it, but I really liked it. So they actually approached, similar to Roger Moore, they actually approached Pierce Brosnan to play the role of James Bond. And he was locked into a contract for a show called Remington Steele, okay? Where here again, he had to wear tuxedos and he had to do different things. It was kind of like a spy type show that was on television here in America. And he said, I'm sorry, I'd love to, but I can't because I'm locked in this television contract. And I know how stringent you guys are for, playing, having people play Bond. Can't do it, sorry. And so they, and funnily enough, after they had cast Timothy Dalton, and he had filmed all of his scenes, and it was in the can, and they were getting ready to go. The show was canceled, and Pierce Brosnan kind of called them and said, "Hey, I'm free," and they said, "Well, we're sorry, we already have a Bond." So he didn't end up getting it until later, okay? And we'll talk about that in the next video. So, Timothy Dalton, here's where the producers decided, instead of doing like what they did with the Pierce Brosnan character, which was kind of take the dial from complete camp and total seriousness and putting it at 100 at 90 degrees to both, they went like from the total camp all the way to total seriousness in like one film. And because you had the total camp that was A View to a Kill, and then you had the total seriousness that is The Living Daylights. And it is a tonal whiplash when you first watch it, because he is a completely different James Bond than Roger Moore was. And I don't think the audience was prepared for that. And so he still had some of the humor, he still had some of the suave, but he was so serious. I mean, he was. And that was just kind of who Timothy Dalton was as an actor. That's kind of how he saw the character of Bond, because he kind of wanted to bring it back to what the books were. This was also based, they took the name from a short story. It's not based on the actual short story. So, in the beginning, the pre-credit sequence, Bond and his fellow Double O's are parachuting down onto the Rock of Gibraltar. They're going to try to infiltrate into the Rock of Gibraltar and do something, okay? And instead of waiting until night, they're doing it in the middle of the daytime, which is really weird. And so the guys parachute down, and one guy who isn't a Double O, he's just a plant dressed up like the Double O's, pretends to take a parachute and hide it away to make it seem like he's part of the Double O's. And he and the guys have paintball guns. The guys on the Rock of Gibraltar, the British paratroopers that are on the Rock of Gibraltar, have their guns are loaded with paintballs. And so he shoots the guy that he thinks is one of the Double O's, and that guy pulls out a gun and shoots him dead. And then he takes a little carabiner and he clips it to a rope that 004 has, and runs it down there to him, and it says "Smirt Spionum," which means death to spies in Russian. And then he cuts the rope, and the guy goes falling down the mountain and dies. And Bond hears about it, and so Bond sees 004 drop off. The other Double O's, we understand, are taken out, and so Bond is trying to catch up to this assassin, and he gets shot by one of the guys, and the guy's like, "Come back here, you're dead." And Bond gets into kind of this foot chase, and then kind of jumps onto this car, and they kind of fight, and basically he kicks the guy off, and then pulls a reserve parachute, which pulls him out of the vehicle. The guy blows up, and Bond lands on top of a vehicle that's traveling along, and our boat that's traveling along the Mediterranean, and this woman is like bemoaning the fact that there's nothing going on, it's completely boring. This is 1987, and she goes, she says, "If only I could find a real man." And then Bond lands on her canopy, and he drops down, and he goes, "I need to use your phone." And then he grabs the phone and sits down, and he goes, "She'll call you back." And then he sits down, and he dials into the thing, and he goes, "Exercise Control 007 here, I'll report back in an hour." And then the woman goes, like, hands him a glass of champagne, and is like, "Won't you join me?" And he's like, Better make that 2. Typical Bond. I mean, it's like one of those things. This is one of the reasons why it's one of my favorite Bond films. I absolutely love The Living Daylights. It's a great one. Um, so the title sequence is done by Aha, the same band that did Take on Me, and a few, and I think they did one other. I think they did one other song on here. I know there was a couple of other songs that were on here that were done by some other bands, but anyway, was done by Aha, titled "The Living Daylights." Um, excellent, excellent one there, and so now what's the MacGuffin of this story? Well, the actual MacGuffin of this story is, ironically enough, diamonds. Um, so there's a guy who wants to defect. Um, so Jerwin Krabbe, who had played a number of villains in the 80s and 90s, um, and even on up into kind of the early 2000s, plays the villain in this film. Also, Joe Don Baker, who went on to play um, Jack Wade, a CIA agent in the Pierce Brosnan films, um, ends up playing another villain in this one called Brad Whitaker. So here again, another example of an actor who played a role in a previous Bond film comes back to play a different role in a separate Bond film later on in the series. Um, Ironically enough, it would be 2 movies from now when he starts playing the role. Um, so, um, so basically, Bond is sent to Vienna, Austria, okay, where this guy named Georgy Koskov, played by Jeroen Krabbe, um, is told that this guy wants to defect, okay, and so and there's going to be a KGB sniper that's going to try to take him out to keep him from defecting, okay. Well, you find out later that the whole thing was a ruse, okay, because within hours of Koskov being whisked away to a safe house, that safe house is promptly attacked by a man, and things are blown up. Now, before that, Bond saw the woman and knew instantly, because he's been around firearms his entire life, he's been around people who know what firearms are, knows that this girl is not a sniper. She doesn't know one end of the rifle from the other. So he shoots it out of her hand, okay? He doesn't kill her, he shoots her out. She shoots the rifle out of her hands, okay? And so Bond ends up coming back from Bond ends up going back to Vienna and meeting with this girl, okay, and finds out that she is a cellist who, played by Miriam Dabo, and she is Koskov's girlfriend, okay. And what ended up happening is that she had kind of overheard what Georgy Koskov was planning with Brad Whitaker, and like kind of planned to have her taken out, so that kind of tying up loose ends, okay. And kind of an interesting thing for the guy to do. And so essentially the upshot of the plot is you have and this was also John Rhys Davies played in this film. He played a general by the name of General Pushkin. Okay. He was a Russian agent that basically they're trying to make believe that this General Pushkin, who replaced General Gogol, Walter Gotell's character at the KGB, is trying to revive this old program from the 60s called Smiert Spionem, okay? And so basically Bond pretend kills Pushkin to make Koskov believe that things are going on. And so what ends up happening is that they end up in Afghanistan. Okay? And originally, the impetus was that this Brad Whitaker guy, okay, was trying to, was supposed to be buying weapons for the Russians to use in Afghanistan. But apparently had not put in any orders, had not made any big shipments of weapons. You find out from Felix Leiter, who's in this film, that they've been monitoring Brad Whitaker, and they understand that Whitaker hasn't really done anything for being an arms dealer. He's not being a very good one, right? And so, basically, James Bond ends up going to Afghanistan, ends up getting thrown in jail because Koskov is basically trying to say that he's on some secret mission from General Pushkin to give misinformation to the West and to do all this other stuff, and Bond doesn't buy it. So Bond and Miriam Dabo's character escape from the Russian airbase with the help of a guy named Cameron Shah, who's the leader of the Mujahideen in that province of Afghanistan where they land. The Mujahideen being the Afghan rebels that were fighting against those the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen was basically the Afghan people that had banded together to fight back against the Russian invasion. And if you've seen Rambo 3, okay, if you'd seen Rambo 3, you'd know that, okay, because he featured the Mujahideen very prominently in this film. In fact, every single film kind of dealt with something. The first film dealt with PTSD. The second film dealt with missing POWs in Nam. This one dealt with the Afghan invasion of the Russians. Okay. The fourth film dealt with some of the stuff that was happening in Burma. And then the fifth film deals with the trafficking that's going along across the southern border. But anyway, back to Living Daylights. So they escape, and they become a part of the thing. And they find out that they have $500 million in diamonds, and they're buying $500 million in opium from these opium dealers in the Golden Crescent. And so, essentially, Bond steals on board with some plastic explosives to blow up the opium, because it's basically he doesn't want the heroin out on the streets. And so basically then there's this big fight at the airbase. Bond takes off in the plane. The Olivia Dabo's character gets up into the back of the vehicle, and Koskov's henchman gets on board, and he and Bond have a big fight. They end up going out the back with a whole big thing of opium, and they fight, and Bond basically like kicks him off, not kicks him off, but like literally takes his boot and like, you know, cuts the laces, and then he falls off. And then Bond turns off the thing, and then he ends up seeing the Mujahideen coming back, and they're being chased by the Russians. Bond throws the plastic explosive down on a bridge, blows up the bridge, and then he takes out Whitaker, and Koskov ends up getting kidnapped by the very much alive General Pushkin, and And then um, Miriam Dabo, I think is her name, not Olivia Dabo. Yeah, Miriam Dabo. Her character ends up being like told by General Gogol, who is now part of the Air Force Service, that she's arranged an immigration visa for her so that she can go into the Soviet Union temporarily and play. And then M informs her that he's out on assignment. And she walks in and she sees two martini glasses sitting there. So there's this running gag of Bond having this keychain finder that has a little plastic explosive and some tear gas in it from Q. And so she ends up kind of, like whistling, and then it ends up doing that whole thing, and then she runs over, and then he's like, you didn't think I'd miss this performance, did you? And then it's like, that's the end of the film. It's a great, great film. I love this movie. It is so good. It's a return to what made Bond Bond. And that's what really counts, is that it really shows that the producers listened to the fans and they went back to what made Bond great. Then they would roll that whole thing up and throw it right out the window when they got to the next film. Which is mind-boggling to me. License to Kill. This is the last of the Timothy Dalton films, and this is the last one we're going to talk about today. Timothy Dalton decided that he was going to kind of come back again. And now, throughout the entire series, we have seen only one instance where Bond went on a personal vendetta. Okay? Most of the time, when Bond would ever show a glimmer of emotion, okay, towards something, okay, he would be admonished by M. This is not a personal vendetta, 007. And he'd be like, yes, sir. I understand that, sir. But for some odd reason, the producers decided to roll all that up, throw it out the window, and say, screw it, Bond's on a personal vendetta. So, in the beginning, Bond, David Hedison comes back as Felix Leiter from Live and Let Die. And he's getting married. Bond's going to be his best man. And they hear that there's this guy named Franz Sanchez who lands in the Bahamas. And or the Keys or something. Anyway, he lands somewhere. And they have a limited window to be able to go catch him. So they basically, they jump into this helicopter. And they take off. And they go capture Franz Sanchez, who's played by Robert Davi. Now, just a year prior, Robert Davi would make one of his Hollywood debuts in this film as an FBI agent, which he caught the attention of the Bond producers, and they cast him as Franz Sanchez in License to Kill. This also features Carrie Lowell as Pam Bouvier, a CIA agent under orders from Felix. It also has Telly Soto, who would go on to be in the Wayne's World movie, and she would also play a prominent role in the Mortal Kombat movies from the 90s. She played Princess Kitana. And it also features Anthony Zerbe, who was a very prolific TV actor up until that point. Didn't have many movie roles, but he would famously be featured in these two films, Matrix Reloaded and Matrix Revolutions, okay, as one of the council members of Zion. So there's there's some connection for you. Um, Interestingly enough, um, Timothy Dalton, um, he he goes on a thing. It also featured Everett McGill, um, who was fresh off of this in 1984, playing Stilgar, and he would go on to play in. Oh, where did I put it? Don't see it right offhand. Under Siege 2, Dark Territory is one of the villains. Okay. Um, just another little connection thing there. Basically, like this had a pretty good cast to it. Okay. It also features Wayne Newton, who plays a character later. But and it was also the second time. So basically, Lois Maxwell, kind of like with Roger Moore, had felt that she was getting way too old to be flirting with the new James Bond. So they recast the role of Moneypenny as Caroline Bliss. And she was okay as Moneypenny. She was very bland. Her byplay with Timothy Dalton was not as good as what you got with Lois Maxwell and like Sean Connery, George Lazenby, and Roger Moore. She just wasn't that great of an actress to be able to pull off that level of chemistry between them. Okay? And it wouldn't be until we got to the Pierce Brosnan Bonds that we got a Moneypenny that was very similar to Lois Maxwell. Okay? And then, as we'll see when we get into the Daniel Craig films, we get a Moneypenny that is very similar to that as well. So it looks like the producers kind of like, yeah, they heard from the fans that, yeah, this Moneypenny not so good. So basically, Bond goes out, and so Franz Sanchez escapes with the help of this corrupt DEA agent played by Everett McGill, and basically captures Felix Leiter. They kill his new bride, and they feed him to a shark, which is right out of the Live and Let Die book. Okay? And so Bond, seeing that, goes to the warehouse, ends up basically killing Everett McGill's character and doing some other things, and then tipping off the people. And then basically he's trying to track down Sanchez, and he's trying to figure out what's going on. So basically Bond like goes on this thing, and he ends up finding out that this guy named Milton Crest, played by Anthony Zerbe, there's no MacGuffin in this story, okay? Well, actually, I guess you could say the MacGuffin in this story is drugs. Because he finds a bunch of cocaine, and he ends up trying to, like, damage the cocaine out of this, like, submarine that goes back and forth. Basically, what he ends up doing is kind of almost 2004 Punisher, which is he plays both ends from the middle, okay? Plays the two villains off of each other, okay? So he plays Sanchez off of Crest. He shows up in this place called Isthmus City, which is where Franz Sanchez lives and controls. Oh, Pedro Armendariz would be in his final film role in this, playing the president of Isthmus City, of this country that Sanchez has basically taken over. Okay? And so, there's that. And so essentially what ends up happening is that Bond and Pam Bouvier end up meeting. They end up finding out what's going on. and then essentially what happens is that, like, Sanchez is buying American Stinger missiles that he's going to use to try to shoot down some planes. And so Pam Bouvier was sent in undercover to try to buy the Stingers back from Heller, this guy who's like a security chief of Sanchez. And essentially, Bond puts a stop to that, and by trying to kill Sanchez, he gets cold feet, tells Pam Bouvier if he ever sees her again, he's going to kill her, blah, blah, blah. It ends at a... it ends at this temple run by Wayne Newton, who is a very prolific singer, but he plays this kind of like, almost like a priest, but it's how people buy their drugs. Okay, it's how these different, like, drug dealers all over the country buy their drugs. They essentially, like, pledge how much they want to buy. Okay, by telling him how much he wants the people to donate, and then essentially the people like call in and say, hey, we'll take this much, we'll take this much, we'll take this much. And then essentially Bond and Pam go on this rampage through the temple. They end up killing everything. And then Bond goes after Sanchez. They end up fighting, and then at the very end, basically it's like Sanchez learns that he's basically Bond, like he learns that Bond was there because Sanchez had killed Leiter. Okay? And it's kind of interesting because he actually got a lighter that says, "Love always, Dylan Felix." And his name is Felix Leiter, and so he goes and then, turns it on and then sends Sanchez up in smoke. So, overall, not a Bond film. Bond is on this, like, personal vendetta most of the time. It isn't until, like, very late in the film that he finally realizes that there's more at stake here than just a personal vendetta. And then he actually starts to kind of calm down and start acting like James Bond again. And then basically he says, M's, trying to get a hold of you. He think he has a job, blah, blah, blah. So Bond ends up coming back to MI6 at the very end. So, again, not a great Bond film, but it's definitely got its moments. Q also kind of does the whole equipping him in the field thing, but they also give him some things to do during the thing. So he's not just the guy who just gives Bond a bunch of gadgets and then leaves. He basically comes in and starts talking to him about, let's do this, let's do that. And so he actually helps Bond out in a lot of ways, which I thought was a really good twist for the character. I thought that was a pretty good one. Ironically enough, this was actually the first film in the series that was, I believe, rated PG-13. Yes, this was the first one in the series that was rated PG-13. Every other film up to this point was rated PG. They avoided the violence factor because when they would shoot people, they didn't have any blood spurting out, they didn't have any language, they didn't have anything like that. But by 1989, and it was, ironically enough, it was because of movies like, let me see if I have it right here. That's not it. Oh, come on, you. Because of movies like Spaceballs, where they had a lot of language, even though there was, like, no sex or nudity or violence, it had a lot of language. They created this PG-13 rating to kind of say, because at that point, PG just meant parental guidance, which most people thought was, like, family-friendly. And they suddenly started realizing that, no, PG doesn't always mean that. And so essentially what ends up happening is that when they went to PG-13 with this film, the series would stay PG-13 from then on. Okay? And there was also some things where, especially in some of the later films with Brosnan and with A View to a Kill especially, there were some scenes in there that were like borderline nudity, where you wouldn't have been able to get away with those nowadays. You'd have them PG-13. But it was just one of those things where, because it was rated PG, again, the Motion Picture Association of America, the MPAA, decided that they needed to do something a little different. So they created an alternate rating called PG-13. Okay? So that's where PG-13 comes from. It was because of a lot of movies, you can probably name a bunch of them, that were not rated R, but not necessarily PG, because they were not family friendly. And so that created the PG-13, and License to Kill was the first Bond film that was PG-13. Alrighty, folks. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this fourth installment of the James Bond retrospective. On the next one, we're going to be getting into the Pierce Brosnan films. And we have 4 films there, and then we'll have 5 films in Daniel Craig. And then I'll see if I'm like this one, if I'm kind of long on it. I may break the future of Bond and like some of my personal favorites and all that kind of stuff into a like separate video, and I may just do that anyway. So smash that like button, hit subscribe, drop a comment below, let me know what you think of these Bond films. Do you like them? Do you not like them? Are these some of your favorites? Are they some of your personal worst Bond films? Let me know in the comments below what you think. And stay tuned for the next installment of the James Bond retrospective. And as we say, we will see you on the next one.